Welcome to the Sci-Fi Shed. Tonight we're going to take a look at Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. When this novel came out, it won the Hugo in 1967. And the novel is written in a point of view of a lunar colonist, a loony, by the name of Manuel Garcia, or Manuel Man. And Manuel basically tells the story, and we find that the year is 2075, and the moon is a penal colony. So it's made up of criminals who've been discharged, political exiles, and freeborn citizens who are, children of the actual convicts that were on the planet. And what we learn is that Manuel is an engineer, is a computer technician of sorts, and he's a pretty good one. He's got an artificial limb, which I thought was pretty cool. He's got an artificial limb that he can have different things attached to it. So it gives him different abilities, different tools, and strength and all sorts of stuff, which I found pretty cool in the novel as well. And what we learn is that Manuel has been fixing this computer. It's actually a Holmes 4 computer. And this computer basically manages all the communication, all the equipment, all the radio, basically everything electronic on Luna. And Manuel has been fixing this computer. And what he's learned is that the computer has actually become sentient. So it's become self-aware, and it's basically having a communication and having dialogue with Manny like he would. And it doesn't take Manny long into the novel to realize, hey, hang on, this is actually sentient. So the novel begins on a really high note, I thought at least, where Manny is talking to this computer, which he's called Mike. So Mike and Manny have this pretty good dialogue and a bit of banter as well, which I thought was quite enjoyable. And what we learn is that Man, as Mike calls him, is the only person who Mike feels is smart, right? He refers to everyone else as stupid, and he's basically craving to have more people that he can talk to. And as Mike and Man start to discuss these things, Mike sort of prepares to introduce him to Wyoming, Wyo, which is this lady who he ensures Mike that is not stupid, right? So Mike is sort of looking forward to this, and he meets up with Wyoming, and it doesn't take long for Wyoming and Mike to really hit it off. And we find that Mike can also alter his personalities, and he puts on a female persona for Wyoming, and the two just hit it off really well and become great friends as well. And what happens is that Mike eventually draws Wyoming and Manny to this underground movement, because the planet, the Luna, is under the authority of the Lunar Authority, which is still governed by Earth, right? So Earth has this warden on the planet, but he's really playing fiddle to the Earth Lunar Authority. And so Mike sort of talks Wyoming and Mike to attend this free rally. And what we find is that there's this underground movement, which Wyoming is a part of, that is looking to, free Luna from the Earth Authority and have Luna being independent. So Wyoming and Mike, through Mike, gets Manny to go to one of these meetings, and a whole lot of stuff happens in there. And that comes to the end of the first part of the novel. The novel is written in 4 parts, but they run really well together. So it reads like a novel. I don't think this is a stitch-up novel, but it definitely doesn't read like one. So the second part of the book is really about revolution, how to build a successful revolution. And that's one of the things in the book that I thought was really well thought out, because what happens is that Wyoming and Manny meet up with this Professor Lars. And Lars is one of these political exiles, and he goes into quite a fair bit of detail. And the novel really goes into that Heinlein professor, university lecture sort of phase, right? Where the professor is basically talking about revolution, the history of revolution, and how to successfully build an organization where you can maintain anonymity and build a successful revolution. I'll have very similar criticism to what I had with Starship Troopers. When Highline gets into that preachy professor mode, you either love it or hate it, and it's just one of those things that it's just sometimes a little bit heavy. But I got to say, it wasn't as heavy, I felt at least, as it was in Starship Troopers when he talks about militarization there. So yeah, part 2 is really around, how do we build a successful revolution? How do we build the organizational structure, and a whole lot of preaching by this Professor Lars. Manny and Lars then go back to Earth to plead their case for an independent lunar colony. The last chapter of the book, I don't really want to talk too much because I think that's where a lot of the spoilers come in. And it's a really interesting ending to the novel as well. I would say it's not a surprise. You have the narrator telling a story, so ultimately he's going to be okay. Otherwise, we'll never be able to tell a story. So I'll leave it at that when it comes to the final and last part of this novel. Apart from mentioning the title is Tanstaffel, which is crept into colloquial language, which is basically the acronym spell out, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. So if you ever wondered where that came from, the Tanstaffel, that's Robert Heinlein, came out of this novel itself. So Robert Heinlein, classic ending to that chapter, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. So look, I'm going to talk about things I liked and things that I didn't like, put the book to some memory test, make some recommendations, and then we'll go rank it on our Hugo and Nebula Award winning ladder. So the things I really enjoyed about The Moon is a Harsh Mistress is the relationship between Mike, the sentient computer, and man. I thought they had a really interesting relationship, and I also really found that Mike was a pretty interesting character as well for an artificial intelligence. And one of the things that really had me thinking when I was reading this, just previously on this channel, I talked to artificial intelligence when reviewed The Killing Thing by Kate Wilhelm. And I talked about the dangers of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we're in this space, right, where it's a very real technology at the moment, and there's huge progress and development in that space. And but I think kudos to Robert Heinlein, because he saw this coming, almost a century ago, right, in this novel. But he sort of takes a different spin. Where Kate Wilhelm was talking about the dangers, potentially of robots or artificial intelligence, I think Manny, or, Mike and Manny, the relationship they had in here really goes to some of the benefits that potentially we may get with sentient computers. But I think there's also a hidden threat in this novel as well when it comes to, hey, how much do we rely on technology these days? And with the move into artificial intelligence, if that intelligence is misused, not quite sure if the sentient, elements will come to fruition anytime, but the misuse of that, right? I mean, they were supported by an artificial intelligence in running a revolution, right? So I think it talks to the benefits and also some of the concerns around technology as well, in a subtle way. So I really enjoyed that sort of play around, artificial intelligence. It's probably here to stay, at least in the short term, if not the long term. But yeah, I thought Robert Heinlein did a really good job of, foresight there when it comes to artificial intelligence. The other thing I would say about this novel, as I was reading through it, is, I can see people criticizing this novel. It does feel at times like it's Heinlein, right? So you love him or you hate him. That's been my experience with Robert Heinlein. I like Robert Heinlein. I do appreciate his writing. I do like his exposition and how he builds those narratives and the stories around it. But yeah, it is a hit and miss for some people. I like Robert Heinlein. And one of the things that I liked in this, the novel is really well thought out, right? This is not something he wrote in a couple of weeks, right? You can really see that he's really thought about this, about revolution, about organizational structure, around a future and what that may look like in a penal colony on Earth. So he's put a lot of thought into that. So I'd say, props, Robert Heinlein. You really did have a really good, hard, long think about this novel. And for me, it really shows as well. So the other thing I enjoyed in this novel was the reference to Logland, which Logland is a logical language. That's what it actually stands for. And it reminds me of Babel 17, the 1966 Nebula Award-winning novel by Samuel R. Delany. So that novel talked to linguistic relativity and how language can affect thought. And Robert Heinlein introduces that in this novel as well, in Logland, logical language, because that's what Mike is programmed in, the computer, the sentient computer. He's programmed in Logland. So I thought it was a pretty good, play on that linguistic relativity. And oddly enough, the novel that actually beat him to the Nebula in 1966 as well. So some of the things I didn't quite enjoy in the novel, Robert Heinlein tends to get into this mood where it gets professor-student mode. And in this novel, one of the actual main protagonists is a professor. And he had the same in Starship Troopers, right? So the actual characters are true to their personalities. But for me, I can't stand... I don't know, sometimes I feel like Robert Heinlein should have just become a professor and forget science fiction writing altogether. And I think he's somehow trying to compensate for that sometimes in his novels. I don't know. But he does get into that, mentor professor mode at times that can get a little bit heavy for me. Luckily, though, for me at least, it wasn't quite as heavy as it was in Starship Troopers. But there is definitely an element of that again, I sort of sat there thinking, again, here we go. I do like Robert Heinlein, but that aspect of it always sort of gets on my nerves. The other thing I would say as a criticism here, I think Robert Heinlein was a writer of his times and his generations, right? And I think in some ways, he treated women better than most people in that generation. And he did try to build strong characters, strong female characters in this story. But sometimes just, there's a particular scene, for example, where there were some technicians who were getting frazzled for something, I can't recall. And there was some struggle as to how do we keep these people doing their job and keep them happy. And the result is, let's just bring a whole lot of pretty girls over there, so that'll make him happy, right? And there was several little instances like that where I thought, sure, maybe that would have pleased the people, I don't know. But he does that a couple of times, and look, it's perhaps a minor criticism, but he does do that from time to time in the novel, that I always feel like, he's writing to an audience. He's a man of the times, and part of me wants to say, look, he was probably better than some of his predecessors, but there is an element of that. So things like that sort of really get on your goat. Then look, take it for what it is. Be warned, I guess, but it's not overly done, mind you, right? I can rattle off a whole lot of other books that are way worse than this is, but there is a small element of that in this novel as well, so keep that in mind. So one of the other things in the novel that sort of had me maybe just worth additional thought, not so much a criticism. So Mike, this sentient computer, had a large part to play in the revolution. I mean, he brought Mike and Manny and Professor Lars together and was fundamental to building the structure and having all the communications work for them to have their ultimate aim. But I just couldn't quite figure out what was in it for Mike. What was in it for Mike? And it's a thought-provoking question. And I think maybe Robert Heinlein, maybe one of the beauties of this book, in hindsight, it might not be a negative at all, but just something to keep you thinking. And maybe that is a little oyster in the shell here, where, what was Mike's motives? I'd love to hear your comments in the chat below. If you've read this novel and you've actually have a thought there, what do you reckon Mike's motivation was? What do you reckon he did what he did? What was in it for him? It sort of had me interested in a novel, and it's not explained, it's not really revealed, but I think that might be one of the things I actually enjoyed now that I finished this novel 2 or 3 nights back. Now in hindsight, I'm thinking, maybe that's one of the things I did consider, because it does require additional thought to, what were perhaps some of Mike's motivations? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. So when it comes to the memory tests I've been putting these novels to, I read this novel a couple of years after I read Starship Troopers, and I really couldn't remember any of it. I just really couldn't remember any of it, which is sort of odd, because I might be given away when it comes to our ranking where this will sit. But no, I think I did enjoy it more than I did Starship Troopers. So it's a strange one. I'm not quite sure why I haven't been able to commit it to memory at all. I think it has largely to do with the recognition of this book. I mean, movies were made for Starship Troopers. It always comes up. And this, not so much, not as often. And that could potentially be why it has sort of fallen off the radar and out of my memory banks. So when it comes to recommendations, I don't know if I'd recommend this novel to new science fiction readers. Robert Heinlein can be a bit divisive. You either love him or hate him, I've found. So I don't know if I'd recommend it to first, science fiction readers. But I'll definitely recommend it to anyone who likes the big three, so Asimov, Clarke and Heinlein. You can't go wrong. I think you will enjoy it, especially if you read other Heinlein books like Starship Troopers. I mean, there's a lot that reminds me of Starship Troopers in the delivery of this novel. So I think you will enjoy it if you enjoyed Starship Troopers. I think if you have an interest in artificial intelligence, that may be an appeal. I mean, it doesn't go into the science or technology of it. We don't really know why Mike became sentient. But, I think if you have an interest in that space, it might be appealing in a sense of, what did our forefathers think about artificial intelligence and how did they see the world evolve around this technology? So there's that element of that I think will appeal to some people. I think if you like Babel 17, the reference to logland and linguistic relativity, or a minor one, I think there's enough there that may just appeal to you in this novel as well. So hey, we've got a ranker on our sci-fi shared ladder. Let me just fix up the cameras and we'll get straight to it. So back to the shared ladder where I've been ranking all the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels. So just as a quick recap, from ascending to descending order, from left to right, we've got June down to Red Shirts, through the Flowers for Algernon, back down to the 5th season. So from left to right, ascending to descending order. And another difficult decision, but I think I might start with Starship Troopers, given it was another of Robert Heinlein's Hugo Award-winning novels. So this may be a bit of a controversial pick, this one, because the Starship Troopers, I did definitely remember more than I did The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. But I wonder how much of that was due to the fact that, it was a very popular novel. It was made into a movie. I watched the movie, and I wonder how much of that has stuck in my mind because of that, or as opposed to any of merit the book actually has. Because every other aspect, I would say, was very similar to Starship Troopers, bar one. One of the criticisms I have of Robert Heinlein's writing is when he gets into that lecture mode, I switch off. I just don't like it. I just don't like it. And I would say that The Moon, for me, is better than Starship because there's a greater element of him going into that lecture mode in Starship Troopers. So, for me, I think I enjoyed The Moon is a Harsh Mistress because even though that element was there in the novel, it was nowhere near as large as it was in Starship Troopers. So I'm going to say it's better than Starship. Is it better than Fountains for Paradise? Let's have a bit of a think about that. Interesting one. Let's just skip to This Immortal for a moment. And I've got to say, no, This Immortal was definitely a better novel for me than The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I really liked This Immortal by Roger Zelazny. I just thought it was a wonderful written novel. Really interesting concepts, great characters. I love that Conrad Nomikos in the novel. Great mix of mythology, history. It was a great novel. So I'm going to say no, it's definitely not better than This Immortal. So is it better than Fountains of Paradise? So now Fountains for Paradise was a really great concept. That space elevator concept, I've never forgotten. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I really did enjoy the mix of the Sri Lankan history and the technology elements of it with the elevator. I thought the characters were okay as well in the Fountains of Paradise, and it definitely stood the test of time. So when I put my ratings against this novel, I've got to say, yeah, I enjoyed overall The Fountains of Paradise more than I did The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Look, that wasn't too difficult tonight. We got there pretty quickly. What are your thoughts? Do you agree, disagree? Would you place it higher or lower on the list? That's where we're sitting today. I don't know, maybe in 5 years, if I was to revisit this, it might be somewhere else. But that's where I'm at today. Hey, thank you for joining me in the shed, and I'll see you next time when we hit another one of these classic novels behind me in the shed.